Hello and welcome to your midweek treat, the Scotland Rugby News podcast, with me, your host, Bruce Aitchison from Happiness Egg-Shaped, and the editor, the man who is scribbling the words, he's doing the interviews, and he's loading us up with content, the one and the only, Mr. Gavin Harper. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Bruce. How are you?
Yeah, good. I've been enjoying the news at the moment because there's been some nice stuff to read about with Glasgow being the semi-final and Scotland women, and we'll get to all of that. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Scotland Rugby News is brought to you tonight by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, and head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV tonight. With thousands of jobs across Scotland, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. So start your search today. So the news today, which my daughter actually pulled me up on this. She said, "Dad, you told me that you didn't think in your lifetime Scotland women would play at Murrayfield." And I said, I'm not sure they'll sell out Murrayfield in my lifetime. But, I didn't think women's rugby would go professional in my lifetime, because I once told Rona Lloyd when she was still at school to go and do another sport because there was no future in rugby. So what do I know? But like hopefully monumental. And you were there and getting a bit of buzz from players and coaches today.
Yeah, no, look, I think I don't know if I expected this to come around so quickly, but clearly there's been an appetite, having sold out the Hive, albeit once. There's been an appetite to explore a bigger venue for the England game, and I suppose if you've sold out the Hive once, then you maybe have made the case for taking it across the car park and into the big house. So, no, look, it'll be interesting. Like, I'm really interested to see how it unfolds over the next sort of 8, 9, 10 months. I think the performances on the pitch will drive a lot of it. I think some of it will have to be marketed differently. I think it'll have to be marketed at a different audience and in different places than men's games are traditionally. I think they'll have to work harder to get people in, but I also would like to see, and like you and I have talked about this so many times that I don't want to bore folk with it again, but I was lucky to be able to go and see Scotland so often as a kid, because there was and the clubs were so engaged, that I hope that clubs that have got strong women and girls kind of sections are engaged with this, and it's not like a blanket, look, we're going to give tickets to every club, whether or not. Like, I think there needs to be a focus on engaging clubs who are active in that space. And then I think the match, speaking to a few folk today, I think the match day itself, the whole sort of around Murrayfield and what goes on before, and is going to look different to how a men's game is, sort of the entertainment and all that kind of stuff. So look, it'll be it's really interesting. I think it's clearly exciting for the players, and did I think it would come this quickly? Definitely not. They've set a target of 30,000 as the sort of top target, but they want, I think it's 18,556, which would take them one over the crowd Scotland got for a World Cup qualifier at Hampden a few years ago. So that, to make it the biggest crowd for a women's sporting event in Scotland. So I think that is more than achievable with 10 months notice. But the challenge, again, is how do you generate atmosphere and all those kind of things. You said it there about speaking to players. I was chatting to Rona Lloyd about one of her first memories was watching Edinburgh at Murrayfield, and she kind of joked, the atmosphere was pretty rubbish. You wouldn't like to think of it being like that again, So, yeah, look, we'll wait and see, but clearly lots of optimism from people at Scottish Rugby.
There's a lot in it for me, and you've touched on some of it. I would love to think Stewartry Sirens are bringing a bus of 50 folk. Yep. Strathmore are bringing 50 folk. Orkney are flying down with 50 folk. Like, I would love to think it's 1:30 on a Saturday afternoon, which is hopefully prime time for families and taking your kids, and it's not. It still costs money, but it's not that expensive. It's also a chance to come on. I'll take you for your first game to Murrayfield. Pricing, like there's a lot there. My worry, and I said this to my daughter when she picked me up on it earlier. Are they hoping England are World Cup winners? And my concern would be that if we had 30,000 folk, 20,000 of them are English, and it doesn't feel like a home game.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of my concern. So I think, without having this implicitly spelled out to me, I think, yes, they are hoping England are world champions. But I think they'll also hope that Scotland have been World Cup quarter finalists at a minimum, and can say, well, we got out the pool, look at this World Cup, we've put something in place before the World Cup
to get
folk excited. We had some sort of faith in the team, and it gives people a chance to say all through that campaign, well, actually, this team are pretty good. The chances are, I think we can say that it's not going to sell out. So if folk decide that there's tickets available because Scotland have beaten Wales and got a quarter final, then fair enough. I think you're right. 1:30 on a Saturday is a good time. I think the ticket prices are reasonable. I would be put off. We're lucky and fortunate in the job that we do that we get into a lot of games, but I would be hesitant to pay £35-40 to sit in the Hive with the sort of restrictions on the view and all that kind of stuff for a game of any nature, whether that's it. I think the ticket prices is a different conversation, but I think they've struck a balance here. I think there's a long time to lead into it, but I am worried that there could end up being swathes and swathes of England fans and maybe not that many out with the norm of, and I think that's where Scottish Rugby are going to have to work hard to get people out with the norm. And there was a bit of chat today about they want to attract fans of Scottish Rugby and fans of women's sport. So actually, if you're a women's football fan, the sort of message would be come along and see what this experience is like. But
I really hope that, and I've not seen the fixture list. I know that some of the clubs are a bit disappointed at the timing or the start of the season. But the 18th of April, it's the end, I think, of a lot of folks' Easter holidays. So maybe it's an ideal thing to be going to. But I would love to think there was not a lot of competition on the calendar that day. There will be, because there's always half a dozen sevens tournaments and there's a tour and there's whatever else. But I just think if they could be, I'm actually surprised you said 30,000 there, but maybe I get too excited. To have 40,000 folk there by the time, Edinburgh can be a tough place to come to, because there's a lot of accommodation, but it's not very, it's quite expensive. So to come from deepest, darkest Englandshire to Edinburgh for the weekend and take in the game, it could become a really expensive. I might put a tent up in the back garden, actually, now I say that. But I would love to think there was 40,000 folk that were willing to pay 15 quid and take their bairns, and all of a sudden you've spent 25, 30 quid and you've all gone to watch a top level sporting event at Murrayfield. I couldn't care that it's women's rugby in that regard. Like, it's a chance to go and see top level sport in a great stadium, hopefully a time of year where it's decent. We're not talking about January, February time. We're talking hopefully April, where the back pitches can be flooded with vans and entertainment and screens and face painting and challenges. And I have now that I've said it would never happen in my lifetime, I'm now wishing there's 60,000 folk there and Edinburgh's flooded and the atmosphere is just different. And and rugby's still a nice place to go, but women's rugby is a really enjoyable place to be.
Yeah, and I think the point to add to that, we were talking before we came on about Rona obviously recorded the video, and even if you look at the journey, her and chatting to Chloe Rowley earlier, and I remember watching them at Broadwood in Cumbernauld, and they were the warm up basically for the men's under 20s games, and they used to start at some horrendous time. It was like 5:30, so that the men could be on at say 7:30, 7:45, and then they moved to Scotstoun, and then now at the Hive, and it's kind of built and built and built. But I think we're now at a stage where the product also actually deserves that recognition. You're saying like a top level sporting event. Well, actually, with no disrespect to those who've gone before, I think the product on the pitch probably wasn't that. I think
no, it wasn't. Of course, it wasn't, because it was an amateur game, and it was, men's rugby wasn't the spectacle it was. It's just that men's rugby had 100 years of run up to it. The bit about Broadwood, whatever Broadwood's mentioned, it makes me laugh, because the only rugby folk that have ever been to Broadwood are folk that played age group rugby under 20s, Scottish women rugby players and their families. Nobody else has been to Broadwood. Of the 67,500 folk that were at Murrayfield for Scotland against Ireland, I reckon 200 of them have been to Broadwood.
There might be some avid Clyde football fans, or
that's been for rugby.
Okay,
the only folk that have been are under 20 players, women, and their families. Nobody else has been.
Or one year they held the Cup Finals Day. Do you remember the Cup Finals Day?
Oh, that's right. They did. That's right. When what was happening at Murrayfield? Was it new pitch or what? There was. That's right. There was something happened. Must have been
the pitch, but yeah, it was. I always remember covering because Preston Lodge were in one of those finals.
That's
and I was
right.
Covering one of those games. So
that's right.
Well, look, but you're 100% right. I think the other thing, just to go sort of back on track a bit, was the
I like teacher.
I was chatting to Makes a Change, Rona and Chloe today about the game at the Hive last Six Nations. And like the big thing before the game was it was sold out, and everybody was taking their families, and it was great. And then Scotland fell flat on their faces and didn't play well.
Was it 55-0? It
was 50, something like that. Yeah, to 47-0. I have in my head, but
okay.
But it was sore. You don't want that. Like that can't happen again. There is now a pressure on those players that result, whether it is another defeat, they have to play well, because if 30,000 folk go to Murrayfield next April and come away going, Scotland did nothing there, they'll not go back, or they'll be harder to convince to go back. So there's an onus on the performance side of it on the day to make it a thing for going forward.
I think it'll be interesting to see how many players were possibly considering hanging up their boots after the World Cup, but are now thinking, hang on a minute, there's a chance to play at Murrayfield here. I've got another winter in me. I've got another opportunity here to do something that not many others have done before. Remember, they played against England behind closed doors the weekend where the weather was hellish, because they came. I was working at Merkston Castle at the time, and I got a phone call from Brian Eason when the game had got called off last minute. Yeah. And I opened the games hall for them at Merky, and they came in at a training session. So I had them on.
That was only 5 years ago.
I had them on the day room while I went and got the keys and got permission for them to be in the games hall. So they were all just kicking about, the Scotland women's squad. And then let them at the games hall to do a bit of handling and some line-out. So then the next day they had to play against England behind closed doors, and it was snowing, and that was a big result that day as well.
Yeah, it was. But that's 5 years since that game, and you would like.
So the bigger story is actually from my living room to Murrayfield more than it is Broadwood to Murrayfield. I didn't see that in Rona's video.
Well, there you go. She's missed you out. You've not made the poster again.
Again. Rona Lloyd has forgotten everything I did for her. Forgotten everything.
There's
it's
some
class.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great, and I think it's
and for the England women, they've been playing at Twickenham. You know, they played against France the same weekend as London Marathon just recently, and it was blue sky and sunshine, and what a game it was as well. You know, you talking about the advert of the game, that was a massive occasion for them at Twickenham to play against France and get the result they got and claim the Grand Slam, and that made everything good. But the chance to play at Murrayfield and have all the trimmings out the back, and do you know what you're talking about, atmosphere there? I wonder if they thought about anybody being on the pitch before the game to get the crowd going and kind of, you know, like having something. I wonder if they thought about that. I wonder.
Well, Caroline Blair was hosting the thing today, so hopefully she's available.
Aye, all right. If that's how it's going to be, if that's it. Well, great news, and they've got a World Cup to go, and we've got plenty to talk about through that World Cup. I'm excited for that, and by this time next year, they'll also be battling to get on that Lions tour or Lionesses or whatever they're going to call it. And there's a bit like this tour for the men. We've got a bundle of players on it and hopefully more to go. Scotland have now genuinely got players that could get selected for that women's tour.
Totally.
Look no further than Emma Orr, who's going bananas. Fran McGee beating more defend. You know, there's players that have got the ability and the stats to back up a selection at that level. So over to URC action, obviously all over for Edinburgh at the weekend. Sort of traveling hope still, and things were going pretty well, and then there's just that wee period where, you know, opposition teams seem to be pretty lethal.
Yeah, I think for me, Saturday summed up Edinburgh's season. I think, like, good in spells, but also mind-bogglingly frustrating, and at times they just don't help themselves. I've seen loads of stuff about, you know, will Sean Everett survive? I think he will. I think they've kind of, you know, if you set out, I think, performance indicators at the start of the year, as far as I'm aware, Edinburgh's were URC playoffs, semi-finals in the Challenge Cup, and they've done both of them. So I think you can tick those boxes, I think, and from where they've been sort of after that Zebra game in February, they've been on a bit of an upward trajectory since then. I think my worry was when it went wrong against the Bulls on Saturday, they still looked like there was a glimpse of that team that was at 6s and 7s against the Lions way back when. You know, they conceded 31 unanswered points at the weekend. To do that in a quarterfinals, not acceptable. But did we really, you know, how much chance did we give Edinburgh even last week? I said sort of, I think it would be a bridge too far for them, and so it proved. But I think they've shown enough over the last 2 or 3 months that the coaches will get another crack at it. But my worry is so many experienced players now leave. There's not a huge amount of experience coming in. So how do they replicate that success if it's how do they continue on the upward trajectory at the start of next season?
Yeah, rugby's a funny one. You know, football transfers come and go, and the number of players that leave don't tend to be that high unless you get a manager that comes in and all of a sudden gets given a heap of money or has got the chance to sell on a whole heap of players. But you look at Edinburgh releasing 12 players, and some of them are huge names for Scottish rugby. You know, Jamie Ritchie, former Scotland captain, definitely a leader and talisman, the kind of, you know, was being talked about in some circles as going on a Lions tour. Ali Price is a British Lion, and at scrum half, where Charlie Shields shown when he's given a chance that he can do it, but the faith appeared to be largely with Ben Vellacott and Ali Price. So it looks like Chico's going to step up there. Mark Bennett, an Olympian with a heap of experience, goes, and then you add Matt Scott in the centre of the field, who I know has only been back for a season, but you talking about experience, between those four players, that's a lot of caps and appearances in URC and Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the key part as well is that they're guys who have been around Edinburgh a long time. Jamie, particularly, is a guy who really cares about Edinburgh. If you think of Edinburgh, who epitomises Edinburgh? Gilco, and then next is probably Jamie. And I think they'll miss that side. Yes, on the pitch he's brilliant, but I think they've shown this season they probably do have enough to allow him to sail into the sunset, fly off into the sunset to France and take probably a much bigger paycheck, and they'll be okay with Muncaster and Hamish Watson. Magnus obviously has really stepped up in the last few weeks. Freddie Douglas, Crosby's there. There's loads of options. I just think you can't take that level of experience. We talked about Bennett, Scotland International, Olympian, Matt Scott, Premiership winner, Dave Cherry, been around the block, played in some horrible games in the second division in France before he joined Edinburgh. Boffelli, probably the world's best fullback in 2022, and
his goal kicking was. I mean, I top of the moon will be able to tell me, but Boffelli's goal kicking stats were outstanding. I mean, Edinburgh would score tries, but then they were getting 7 because of Boffelli. If teams infringed, he was making them pay by picking up frees. Like his goal kicking was world class. So safe under the high ball. Maybe didn't have the sort of counter-attack threat that they would have liked, but you would have forgone that for all the things that Boff brought. I think, you look at the I've criticised somebody like Javan Sebastian loads of times and said, well, he's maybe not made that step up to be a regular international. But you think, well, you get rid of a guy to Cardiff, which was confirmed earlier this week, and Cardiff are sending their second choice tight head, who happens to be Scottish qualified, to Edinburgh. So why make the change? Fair enough, Javan probably decided that he wanted a change, but it feels like a lot of turnover of players. Bomber Hislop's away, but you bring James Whitcomb in, and he's going to have to step up and play probably semi-regularly if Bohan Venter ends up in the Scotland squad. Dylan Richardson brings a bit of experience to replace Dave Cherry. But he's not like the guy's got 6 Scotland caps, and the first one of them was in the back row. It's not like you're bringing in a hardened guy who's played hundreds of games in his career at hooker. So you're looking at Ewan Ashman, Paddy Harrison, and Dylan Richardson actually being, 2 out of 3 of them are relatively green for the sort of stages of their careers. So, yeah, I don't know. It's tough, the scrum half situation. Conor McAlpine ended up on the bench at the weekend. So who becomes that? The guide almost that Ali Price has been, the one that when you need somebody to box kick and manage a game alongside Ross Thompson or Ben Healy,
That's not Ben Vellacott's style. I don't think it's Charlie Shields' style. So does that say that Edinburgh are going to change the way they play? I don't know. There's a lot in it, but I think it's...
There's a lot. Do you know the name we've not mentioned, and I feel like he's become forgotten, which is a shame because he was going so well. Jamie Hodgson. When Gilco has signed a year, I think.
Yep.
Is that right? So he's got a year. Sam Skinner, I think, has been very good this year, but I don't know how much longer Sam's got.
Well, I mean, Sam was plagued by a serious knee injury and had to have surgery this time last year. So you would want Gilco at 34, 35. You would want guys who could cover. And it looks like Edinburgh are placing an awful lot of faith in Rob Carmichael, who is giant, yes, and looks like he could be a handy player, but we've not, you've not seen that much of him to suggest, right, okay, you can be quite safe in letting a Scotland international like Jamie Hodgson go, and we'll rely on Marshall, Sam Skinner, Gilco, and that's about it. On the weekend for a quarter final, Edinburgh were talking about, well, Magnus Bradbury might have to move into the second row. Like Magnus Bradbury in the second row against the Bulls in Pretoria, who've got basically 4 second rows in their back 5, like, plus a proper number 8. Good luck, Thanks very much. Magnus must have been thrilled that the 2 second rows did 80 minutes.
He's that's a big ask. And then there's boys, Jake Henry, Nathan Sweeney, Jack Hocking. None of the 3 of them have really made a dent in it. But young players, obviously Nathan Sweeney, unfortunately due to injury, is having to pack in altogether, which is a real shame because he's another one that just doesn't seem to have had any amount of luck in his career. Jake Henry has, flirted and been there, but then went away on loan. And then Jack Hawking's just one of the kids that I think he's going overseas. I think he came across from Australia, didn't he, initially, to play age group rugby.
I think I was pretty impressed last year when Jack Hawking came off the bench for the 20s. And yes, the opposition in that World Trophy thing was limited, but I thought he looked pretty sharp, and I was surprised not to see him get maybe more of a crack this year. But clearly, somebody like Jack Brown has taken the chances he's been given, and I suppose that's part of professional sport, isn't it? That the opportunity, if you get it, you've got to take it, and if you take it, it could be yours for good. And somebody like Jack Brown, I think, has really grabbed that chance to be the next kind of cab off the rank. And it's unfortunate for somebody like Jack Hawking, but yeah, I think he'll go to wherever he's going and probably do quite well. I think, yeah, Nathan Sweeney, you touched on, a shame for it. It's not really worked. He's had so many injuries. And Jake Henry, I found funny because he kind of had to play towards the tail end of last season. Mm-hmm. He did all right. I think he played in the games in South Africa, did okay, and then went on loan. And it now looks like Edinburgh's statement when they announced their leavers was that he would stay at Coventry. But I read somewhere that he was also leaving Coventry. So I'm not really sure what's happened there, but I hope there's somewhere for him, because I think he was he looks like a player with promise.
Yeah, and there's no sevens for somebody like him to go to, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah, it certainly is.
That's a whole, and it just looks like it's gathering more and more moss as that one rolls. But Edinburgh, I think you said it there. Performance outcomes, semi-final, playoffs. For some supporters, that's not enough. They want to see silverware, which I still think is ambitious for almost anybody, other than there's 3-4 teams can genuinely say they've got it in them for a whole season. We're a wee bit like the English Premiership. I feel like that there's only a few teams that can actually sustain a whole season. But then, Glasgow last year showed it turns into a cup tie, and they did what they did. But Edinburgh, I think we need to get over the calling for folks' jobs now. I think there's enough there to say, there's more to come. I think next year is going to be challenging. I think for both Edinburgh and Glasgow, it sounds like the squads are being cut. I don't know that officially, but I heard it from a reasonably reliable source the other night.
They are being cut.
And that puts pressure on, obviously, because then if you get injuries like both teams have sustained this year, where do you go? Do you just pick up free agents that are floating around? Do you go to the club game? I don't know. So that one worries me a bit, because the game is getting more and more attritional. I had a great conversation with somebody this morning. We were talking about things that could improve the game of rugby, which is for one of those pods that we keep promising. I hate the use of 8 subs. I hate the use of bomb squads. I hate all that, because it just makes the game so attritional and physical, rather than players like Darcy Graham and being able to go and find space and play. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But with that come injuries, and not necessarily just a wee niggle for next week, but Edinburgh and Glasgow, top of the moon, will be able to help me out in this one as well. But the number of players that have had more than 3 or 4 weeks off, that's really damaging to a team.
Yeah, totally.
Glasgow, we still keep saying, is Xander going to be back? Is Xander going to be back? Is Matt Fagerson going to be back? With Edinburgh, Duan's out for a long time. So, those things worry me. But I think there's enough in the tank to be optimistic. There always is. And with the fixture list the way it is, lots of Friday night games, maybe it creates a buzz again at the Hive. Speaking of Friday night games, Glasgow on Friday night, before we get to their performance, I liked how they got to say cheerio in front of their own crowd to the players that are leaving.
Yeah, do you know what? I was sceptical. I was typical journalist, ever the cynic. Why have they not done this before? Why have they, what's going on? Why have they not done something at the dinner, which was a few weeks ago now, maybe a couple of months ago now. But actually, it was a really nice touch for all the players, whether you'd played 100 games or whether you'd never played for Glasgow, to have a kind of moment at Scotstoun with the supporters, getting a jersey. And yeah, I thought it was great. I was disappointed. I obviously interviewed Seb Cancellieri during the week, and he told me he wouldn't play, and he was gutted at not getting a farewell. But Tom Jordan and particularly Henko were outstanding on Friday night, and I can't remember many. Nico, maybe sort of when Nico was leaving or when he was like flying up the wing, I can remember him getting reception, but I certainly can't remember somebody like Finn, for all the great things Finn's done, getting a send-off or a reception like Henko got when he came off on Friday night. It was absolutely incredible. Just on that, there's a comment here I want to read. Emotional stuff from Henko. Do you think the SRU's got his focus on Scottish talent right?
Oh, geez, Alan, how long have you got, my man? How
long
have you got?
Henko did press at the start of the week and has obviously opened a bit of a can of worms, in that he said he didn't want to leave Glasgow, which was then disputed by people at Murrayfield who are saying, well, he chose to sign a contract with Brive. There's a piece on the site that explains it all, but as we sort of understand it, Henko had actually... The basis was Glasgow's budget has been stretched because the value of some of their star players, and if we look at who they've re-signed, Sione, Xander Fagerson, Matt Fagerson, there's a lot of star kind of pulling power in that. The budget was stretched. There wouldn't necessarily have been an offer that was deemed acceptable for Henko. So when he knew that, he signed for Brive. That is how I sort of we understand it. So it's not the case that Henkel hasn't been kept because he's not Scottish. I think the case from people at Murrayfield was that if you want a Scottish player, a non-Scottish qualified player, that's fine, but you'll have to, going forward, make more of a case to have a non-Scottish qualified player than maybe has been the case before. So if you look at the case of Piers O'Connor, for example, signing for Edinburgh, he can play, I think he plays 10, 12, 13, 15, and obviously would be available right through the season and could probably fill the gap that they've got with Bennett, Scott. You know, there's more nuance to it than we just don't want anybody who can't play for Scotland, I think is the point there.
Yeah, Alan, personally, when Edinburgh and Glasgow are owned by Scottish Rugby, yes, I think that it makes sense to have Scottish-based players. So one of the things we keep saying is exposure to games. If you've got somebody who's not qualified for Scotland, that means Scotland have only got one player to choose from that is starting in that position. So I liken it to the coaches. At the moment, we don't have a Scottish head coach. Now, we used to have when we had a sevens team because we had 3 opportunities for people to be head coaches. Cal McRae's just become head coach at Benetton. John Dalziel's about to go with the British Lions. They've got experience being head coaches with Scotland Sevens. All right, it's not 15s, but it's the experience. It's the same skills. It's managing a squad. It's picking, it's selecting, it's peaking at the right times. It's all those things. And you're also managing a management team with strength and conditioning, team managers, physios, da-da-da-da-da. Right, so you've got that. The next Scotland coach, I struggle to see when the next Scotland coach will be a Scotsman. Now, a couple of people have thrown this back at me and say, oh, what about Clark Laidlaw? What about Greg Laidlaw? What about... Right, okay, but they're pretty far out of sight at the moment. And somebody said to me that Clark Laidlaw could potentially become the first non-Kiwi to be the head coach of the All Blacks. That's how highly regarded he is. Now, I don't know if I believe that or not, but there's only 2 chances to be a Scottish head coach.
Yeah.
And neither of them have got a Scotsman in it. So if you rewind that back, Loosehead, so you've mentioned already, Boan Venter might become Scottish at some point. But the only chance we've got of playing first choice Looseheads is for Edinburgh and Glasgow. And if that spot is filled by somebody who's not Scottish, then when we go to pick a Scotland team, we're picking folk who are not getting to play a lot of rugby. So a long-winded answer, Alan. I don't know if it's a thing. I think David Nucifora has come out saying it's a case-by-case basis or whatever the caveat or loophole is. I like the thought of watching players that have come through our system and have an opportunity to play for Scotland. That is a personal view that is not reflected of NewsQuest or Scotland Rugby News or Scottish Rugby or anybody else that I've possibly worked for or with. That is entirely my personal opinion.
But I think the point is right that, look, if you've got players who are blocking Scottish players' paths to professional rugby or international rugby, that's a problem, and you need to sort of get that to do something about that. I think where I understand people's gripes is, well, what happens when these guys go away with the Six Nations? You know, are you left with a situation where, just like in Super Series, it was all the kids of the Futures 15, if you remember that, against guys who'd played 15 years of club rugby because they got chewed up and spat out, and the same thing will happen on a much bigger scale to guys who are asked to step up. If you're an 18-year-old and you're asked to step up and play, now some 18-year-old anomalies, Freddie Douglas would have been able to do that, but not everybody can. And I suppose that's the next point of that, and to some of the points you've made. David Nucifora gave a briefing to journalists this week, So we're hoping that some clarity on some of the things he kind of outlined that are around the pathway and stuff like that will be hopefully announced tomorrow, as we're recording on Wednesday night. Yeah, so hopefully announced tomorrow at some point, and we'll be able to talk about and explain some of that. So, yeah, I think there's stuff going on clearly in the background to make this more, to refine this a wee bit. But I think I agree, you can't have a squad packed full of foreigners. You know, if you look at Edinburgh under Alan Solomons, there was guys there who were blocking probably Scottish guys getting in jerseys, and that's not right.
You look at Newcastle Falcons signing policy. Mike Brown, no longer an England international, Newcastle take him. Toby Flood, no longer an England international, Newcastle take him. Like you're saying, he's not going to be away. We'll get at that point, Premiership, we're playing through international windows, but it meant they had one of the best standoffs, one of the best fullbacks, because they've signed Murray McCallum. I think Murray played 30 games for Newcastle this year. Can play at loose head, can play at tight head. Scotland are not going anywhere near him. Newcastle go, right, we're able to pay somebody who's an international front row, and he's going to be available every week for 80 minutes if we want, because there's no caveat on his time. So let's go for it. The bit, and I remember hearing somebody talking about Ronaldo, and if Ronaldo signs, clubs didn't actually make that much money selling replica shirts. Like that's not where the money comes from. If Edinburgh, like Boffelli was a kind of, he was a bit of a luxury, but what a luxury he was, and there was certain players that, like Nico, Leone, Bill Mata, they were luxuries.
But they've all added significant value on the pitch, and they've all and the same thing. And to go back to Alan's comeback, you see what you're saying, like to that point, totally. If you were like, I worry that number 8 and back row is a position I think Glasgow are leaving themselves light and reliant on a guy in Sione Vailanu, who, it should be said, had signed a contract at the start of this season. So you wouldn't expect that contract was extended if this policy, or whether it is a policy or not, is a thing. You wouldn't expect that contract to be extended. But they're now relying on a guy to hold the fort when Dempsey and Fagerson are away with Scotland, or you're saying, well, Ewan Ferry can do a job there, or maybe there's a move for somebody like a Tom Curry. But it already feels like you're asking a lot of guys, either young guys or guys who've not played that much rugby, to shoulder a lot of responsibility and at a key time of the season. It's always, coaches always talk about that. They might only play now a couple of games during the Six Nations and whatnot, but you drop 10 points there and you could all of a sudden be out the top 4, top 8, whatever it is. So, yeah, I totally take Alan's point that I think a real pro as cover is 100% necessary. To my point about Cancellieri, like, I think that's a baffling decision, even more baffling that the guy is basically going home to retire. He's said, well, my pro rugby career's done. So, yeah, I think, he could add significant value to Glasgow. And if you look at, they're getting rid of Logan Trotter's leaving. I mean, Kakusau's going to Northampton. Cordero's leaving. So there's not been a back three signing. And as far as I understand, I don't know that there will be. That, to me, that's a worry.
Wes Houston, to a certain extent, felt like that when he first arrived. I felt like it was a bit of a luxury, and as it turned out, it's just as well, because he's been one of the more durable in that position, and he probably wasn't really the thought that he's going to play so much at fullback, but I'm not sure
after his first season, if you had sat in front of Wes and called him durable, I'm not sure he'd have thanked you hugely for that, but you're totally right. But there's a guy who I suppose has added value to Edinburgh, and has gone on, will now probably go on to become Scottish qualified. Well, he will, because he's signed a contract. So
yeah, I don't think any of us saw that coming, or I certainly didn't. I didn't think Wes was here to play for Scotland. I thought he was
I genuinely don't think Wes was here to play for Scotland, but that chance has now come up. Alan's back in with a point about something different. Can Glasgow make it further without holding? We should probably talk a wee bit about Leinster, although we have done a completely separate pod with a guest, which we'll put out tomorrow, probably tomorrow, that talks about the game in detail. Can Glasgow make it further without Xander holding up the scrum? In a word,
here we go, Alan. Here's what I'm hoping for. Leinster feel the pressure because this game means absolutely everything to them, because they have to win because they made a mess of Europe. They feel the pressure. Glasgow, George Horn lets loose and does some George Horn things, and Glasgow come away with a 7 or 8 point victory. There's optimist Bruce speaking. We'll now go to Gav.
Yes, here, ever the pessimist. Glasgow get bullied up front and have no platform to play off. Sione will be the only one, and Henko will try and take them on the front foot, but Leinster will win by 15 points. That's, and I think Murphy and Sam Talakai had a tough evening on Friday night. They're probably going to have to go again, given injuries. Leinster will, you would imagine, barring some sort of disaster, go full strength. So you'd be looking at Murphy against Andrew Porter and Cian Healy. Cian Healy's last ever game of rugby, and his first, he probably played either with or against you, Bruce. So
I think he actually played 10 minutes before me. I mean, there's the Leinster thing. They could go big crowd at home. Yeah, this is all we've got to play for. There's boys that we want to send out in a high. They could be sensational. I mean, there's a very, very high chance that that's what they're going to be. And Glasgow are up against it.
But 12 months ago...
yeah, I know. And it was me. I said I didn't think they were getting anywhere. I hear you.
We had exactly the same conversation, but I think the difference is if you compare the Munster team Glasgow went to play and the star power of that Leinster team and the things that individually those players can do, as well as the collective strength, obviously, I just think it might be one step too far. But if Glasgow were to win, would it surprise me hugely? Not really. And do you know what? That other semi-final, they will be absolutely knocking lumps out each other. The Sharks against the Bulls. Like, from a Glasgow point of view, that couldn't have worked out any better. The Sharks and the Bulls, because they will go all out.
It's going to be horrendous. Absolutely horrendous.
And then if Glasgow managed to win the semi-final, by the way, it could be on again. It could be back to back. And particularly
if Glasgow go back to back, I'll walk from Murrayfield to Scotstoun in my bare feet.
Right, it's a deal. You heard it here first.
I feel like last year the surprise was there. This year, I think it's harder because nobody's going to take Glasgow lightly. Nobody saw them coming last year.
No, totally. But I think, do you know the element of surprise that Glasgow had last week was they've been rubbish for weeks. And I didn't think, I thought Glasgow would be better and I thought they would get by. But I didn't see the performance coming. I was surprised how well they played. I was surprised to see Sione running over the top of folk and stepping folk and Tom Jordan's sort of high knees through tackles and stuff.
They looked like an unreal energy about Glasgow. It just looked like they were ready to rumble. Tom Jordan.
Here we go. We've had two very, very different responses to the Bruce Aitchison Murrayfield to Scotstoun walk. William Wallace, the aptly named William Wallace, says you've got to do it in your Y fronts.
I do have Y fronts, William.
I'm slightly frightened about. And then a man you know well, the Mr. Moffat Rugby Club, Cammy Little says he'll sponsor you £100, and I will sponsor you £100 not to do it in your Y fronts.
Cammy Little, the best. Have you had his sausage rolls yet? I keep saying this.
Yeah, I have to say, my old man lives in Moffat, so yeah, I'm quite lucky.
Oh, outstanding sausage rolls. Right, big fella, lots to do tomorrow. A wee special podcast that we put together with one of our Glasgow Warriors favourites. So tune into that, folks. But thanks for tonight. A quick word from our sponsor to finish off. The Scotland Rugby News podcast is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com right now and upload your CV. With thousands of jobs across Scotland, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. So start your search right now. Gav, great to see you. Have a great week and a great weekend. And I look forward to catching up with you next week to talk about Glasgow in the final.
Speak to you soon, Bruce. Take care.
Cheers, pal.